Hello and welcome to the Brazilian BA guest. We have here a different interview, a different guest every week talking about some business analysis and subject of interest. And for today, I have a very good friend of mine who comes from Belgium, also an IIBA chapter president, my friend Filip Hendrickx. Hello, Filip. Thank you for coming.
Thanks for inviting me, Fabrizio.
Filip, I do have a nice question for you today. The question is, how can we make change stick?
It's indeed I think, good and interesting question because you have to realize that whatever you do as a BA or as someone with some kind of BA role, you are always working on change. Whatever you do is either a big project or a small update, but you are changing something so that people will work in a different way or customers will have a different experience. So the first step to make sure that you can make change stick is to be aware that you are inflicting change on people, and that process starts at what I call day zero. Whenever you start thinking about something and talking about it to people, no matter how early in the process, people will already react in a way because they see that change is coming. So that awareness, everything is a change project, and it starts really early to help people through that change. That's already a very important first step.
Will people see change as a problem, or will people be change as something they are willing for? When we are working as business analysts, we are always enabling change by the definition of business analysis from the BA guide. And we are change enablers. Sometimes we are solving problems and people must react well on that. And sometimes we're just trying to explore some opportunities and maybe people won't understand change very well. Is that an issue?
It's a challenge, I'd say. And actually, the fact that you use the word issue and that I use the word challenge is already an interesting point, because depending on the word you use, people will be more or less reluctant or interested in listening to you and in engaging for the change. But typically, people don't like change that much. There are people who like change, who like to try out new things, but overall, most people show some kind of resistance. So we have to find ways to deal with that resistance. And because we are, as you say, change enablers, we have a very important role to play to work with that resistance, to see how we can engage people to make the change happen. And because we have so many interactions with people in, for example, the workshops we do or the interviews we do, we have many moments where we can engage people for the change by really listening to them, for example, making sure you understand why they might be reluctant, what their concerns might be. And by showing them that you try to empathize with them, you really do your best to actually understand those concerns. And so those soft skills are obviously very important to make the change happen.
As a business analyst, one thing that always bothers me is that when I'm working with an organizational change, I'm always defining requirements, I'm defining the possible solution, and I stop my work before the change actually being done, because I'm working in defining the change and not developing the change. And sometimes the change doesn't stick because even if it's well defined, people, it involves a lot of other aspects, cultural aspects. Sometimes people have to want to change, as you were saying, and how do we make that stick again?
Yes, well, I think that what you mentioned is actually a key point, in my opinion, to make change stick. Often we do work in shaping the solution and maybe in designing them, but the actual change comes long after we already moved on to another project. And I think we have to change that. We have to change our approach by making the changes much smaller and implementing much smaller changes and learning from those. We can see what works and what doesn't work. We can see what sticks and what doesn't stick. And we can fine tune and incrementally build our solutions. So instead of seeing it as a big thing and a big change, which is more difficult, that only comes after we have already moved on, we have to try to do it in small steps, engage people in those small steps, show them that we learn from what works for them and what doesn't work for them, and iterate, steadily build up the entire solution. And I think that's an important part of making change stick.
I see you're bringing an agile mindset to this enabling change behavior that we are trying to do, right?
Yes, you're not only trying to learn, does this solution solve the problem? You're also trying to learn, will this solution stick? And so
That's
that's a
great.
different way of looking at requirements analysis. It's not just about the solution requirements, it's also about the change requirements.
Interesting. Interesting. What probably would call transition requirements or something like that, but I like the way you call it change requirements.
Yes, because transition requirements is perhaps often interpreted as technical transition requirements. We have to move stuff from database A to database B. That's important, but there is a human factor which is much more important to make the change stick.
Yes. Change culture, change the way people think. It's even harder.
Yes.
Interesting. And Philip, I know that you have recently published a book that talks about making change to stick. That's called Brainy Glue,
Mhm.
and it's something that makes it calls exactly for the point we are talking about, is that changing people's mindset and make change possible to change the mindset. Can you tell us a little bit about your book?
Yes. So the book is actually a business novel about business analysis, innovation, and change. And so we have written a story, Ian Richard and myself. We have written a story where we follow a business analyst throughout her project and to see how does she facilitate workshops, where does she get her information, how does she engage different stakeholders in the organization to co-create the change with her to tackle a social media problem that that organization is dealing with. And we see how the different techniques she uses help her make change happen in the organization. So it's very tangible. We've tried to make it as much as possible real life in order to make our message stick with the reader. And if people want to know more about that, they can check out the website brainyglue.com, which also offers a free sample, so you can check out the book and see if you like it.
And I had the opportunity to read the first edition, and it's very nice because it's a story. When we study business analysis and how to make change in organizations, it's always very hard, and it's always not approachable as you did in this book, because it's a nice story we can follow. It reminds me about other books that I have written in my life, like the Monk and the Executive, about leadership. That's a nice
Mhm.
story. And who moved my cheese? I don't know the name in English for this one, but it's also a nice tale, and so it's easy read, and you can engage in the life of that characters that you create, and with their dilemmas. And other thing is that usually people who works as we do as business analysts or consultants or architects or someone who is trying to make change, enabling change in organizations, we don't have very much opportunities to see other people working, doing the same thing. We can read books, but books tells about the techniques and they don't show the story. And you showed us. So thank you, Philip. It was very nice.
Thanks. That's nice feedback.
And I hope people who are watching us have the same opportunity. So this is a good tip. Philip, thank you for coming. It was a pleasure.
Same here. Thanks for hosting this.